Hello, my loves, and welcome back to the Thank Goddess podcast. It's Danny here, your host. Today, I have what I believe to be a really juicy episode for everyone. Today, I am speaking on the goddess Eris, who is also a dwarf planet. Well, the planet was named after this goddess. And I really believe the more I study her and her archetype and her shadow frequency, but also more importantly, her higher frequency, because every archetype has both a shadow frequency and a higher frequency that we can really learn from and we can look at within ourselves. And that's the beautiful thing about archetypal work and even just studying astrology. There's so much wisdom in it for us to learn about ourselves. Anyway, point being is that I feel that Eris is a really vital goddess that we should be working with in today's day and age, particularly those of us on a spiritual path, because what you're going to understand about Eris today is that she isn't the people that want to work with her. I want to say you have to be like really brave, because she actually is. In her highest frequency, she is a warrior goddess, in my opinion. She embodies the traits of empowerment and bravery and fighting, I suppose, for what's right and what's just. And she really requires us to look at our own shadows, which isn't for the faint of heart. But I think if you stick with me in this conversation and you're open to hearing what I'm going to speak about in today's episode, then I really believe that you're here to kind of be a change maker in this way and lead the rest of humanity into, I suppose, being able to deal with these darker parts of ourselves that a lot of people tend to bypass or they don't want to look at, because it's, most of us want to present ourselves as this nice person. We all want to be the good guy, right? I think every single person, regardless of our intentions, in some way, we're always justifying that. Even if we're acting not in our highest accord, we're always justifying it to say that somehow I'm right in acting in this way. And I think what Eris really asks us to do is actually be really real with ourselves and kind of look at maybe where we're not acting in our highest accord, where we may be being judgmental of others, where we actually maybe not treating people how they deserve to be treated just because we within ourselves are in pain or we're wounded, and so we're trying to project that outwards onto other people. So it's a big conversation. But where I really want to start is to talk about Eris as a planet, because I think it's really interesting to note that Eris was actually found by astronomers in 2005. So she was actually only recently discovered. So she hasn't been around for a long time. And what I find really interesting about her story and her discovery was that, so she was found after Pluto, but when the astronomers found Eris, right, Eris, the planet Eris, is actually larger and denser as a planetary body than Pluto. So if they were to actually label Eris when they discovered her in 2005 as an actual planet, then that would have disturbed the whole structure of the solar system that we know today. So instead of creating a whole different planetary structure, they decided to demote Pluto. So this is when Pluto was demoted to a dwarf planet. So you might have heard of that term before, dwarf planets, and essentially it's alluding to these smaller sized planets, and they've kind of got their own category now. So they're not the same as, the other planets like Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, Venus. They're in their own category. And astronomers have found many other dwarf planets since discovering Eris. But what's really interesting is that they didn't want to include Eris in the system that we currently have today. And instead they decided to demote Pluto, which is, why do I find that really interesting? Just from more of a feminine perspective, someone who, really studies the feminine mysteries, I think it's really interesting because we don't have many female planets in our current solar system, or what we believe to be female planets. We have Venus, which we know, we have the moon, but that's kind of it. It's kind of like a boys' club. And what was interesting is Eris is a feminine planet because she was labeled or named after the Greek goddess Eris, and that's how she got her name. And what I also find really fascinating is that, because I'm someone, I really believe in the Hermetic principles, and as the Hermetic principles go, as above, so below. So the cosmos are really a representation on a grander scale of our internalized psyche. So we have all the stars within ourselves. So that's why astrology is so accurate for so many people, because as above, so below, what we see out there is actually all within us. And so from more of an esoteric lens, it is said that when we, in the astronomers, find new planets in the solar system, that is signifying that we are also discovering a new depth or layer to the human psyche. So what I find really interesting is that Eris was discovered in 2005, and I believe that this was the point where humanity was actually, as a whole, collectively, ready to start working with Eris and looking at how that archetype shows up in our psyche and how she operates. And the reason why we need to look at this part of ourselves, right, within the collective subconscious, is because when we bring it into the light, when we shine a torch on it, that's how we heal it. We and I talk about this so much on this podcast, like anything that's dark or hidden, and Eris is really considered a dark goddess because she's often labeled the goddess of chaos and discord. So she's also, if you're into the Roman goddesses, she was the Roman goddess Discordia. So that's the same goddess, Eris and Discordia. She was known for strife and for war. She's the sister of Mars. So you get like kind of a warrior feel from her, this aggressive feel for her. But what I want to say is that she gets a really bad rap, but I feel that she is a part of our psyche that we haven't fully integrated. And in order to actually like work with her and integrate her and heal the shadow frequency of Eris within ourselves, in my opinion, as someone on a spiritual path, it requires us to really step up as spiritual leaders or spiritual warriors that are like, you know what, I'm not afraid of the shadow. I'm not afraid to look at this. Whereas I think most people in the collective consciousness right now are afraid to look at their Eris. They don't want to associate with Eris. Maybe they're comfortable associating with Venus, the goddess of love and beauty. Maybe they're comfortable associating with the moon, which represents like the mother, how we're emotionally fed. But Eris, this goddess of chaos and disorder, and it's said that she was the one to start the Trojan War. I think a lot of us will be like, no, I'm not that. I'm not the troublemaker. I'm not the woman that, gets, and I'll talk about the mythology in a little bit, but I'm not the woman who gets excluded from the party. This is very much the Eris archetype that we need to look at for those of us that are ready, right? So again, if you're listening to this conversation, if you're curious about Eris, then I feel like you're ready to receive her and her wisdom. And I think she's a really amazing goddess to work with, because if we can actually transmute the shadow Eris into the high Eris, I think that is going to advance us so much spiritually on the spiritual path. I think it can clear up a lot of karma for ourselves, and it can also heal the world in such a drastic way, because I really believe the more of us that do this work, the more we will change the collective consciousness. And this really, Eris is really inviting us to step into Christ consciousness. That's really what this conversation is going to be about, and you'll see that as I get into more of what we're going to discuss here. To speak a little bit more about Eris the planet, she was discovered in Aries, and she takes a long time to orbit the sun. She takes 558 years to orbit the sun. So when she was discovered, she was in Aries. She's been in Aries since 1925, and she's going to be there until 2047. So every single person listening to this podcast, I mean, in this time, unless you're listening to this way in the future, if it's still around, you will have Eris in Aries. Aries, if anyone who doesn't know anything about Aries, Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. Aries is the warrior, it's the initiator. It can sometimes be associated with aggression, or it's a fire sign, so it can be very heated and move impulsively. But Aries, from a higher aspect, which is ruled by Mars, is also, it's divine masculine energy. It's also bravery, it's courage, it's leadership. It's going after what we want and not backing down no matter what obstacles come in our way. It's the warrior archetype. And so Eris, which we've discovered is in Aries, but she's also said to be the sister of Mars. So so I just want you to get a feel for her before we kind of get into her mythology, about how she's a bit of a warrior. She's not afraid to stand up for things. She's not afraid to start a war maybe, or fight for what she wants, or fight for what she believes. This is not an archetype of the feminine that we are so exposed to, particularly when we're young girls and we watch lots of Disney movies. We don't see many Eris women. She's often seen holding a dagger. Sometimes she's seen with hissing snakes or a torch. And she's also the daughter of Nyx, who is goddess of the night. So really, I get this whole theme around dark feminine energy, her mother being the goddess of the night. So I want to talk a bit about the story of Eris. So some of you may have heard this story, but for those of you that haven't, this is the mythology of Eris. And we're going to kind of dive into it after I tell this story. But what I would invite you to do as you listen to this story is to see kind of like what your first impressions are of Eris. Like, is she someone that you gravitate towards, or do you feel a resistance towards her? So just get curious. I mentioned before that Eris played a big role in the Trojan War, or so the mythology goes. The story goes so that Zeus invited all the gods and goddesses to a party, and it was the wedding of Peleus and Thetis. I may have not pronounced that correctly, but anyway, they were celebrating a wedding. Point being, they were celebrating a wedding, and they decided not to invite Eris because Eris was known to be the troublemaker. Wherever Eris goes, trouble follows. There's always chaos, there's always discord. So Zeus was like, nope, you can't come to the party, Eris, you're too much trouble. So what did Eris do? She didn't just stay home. She decided to come and crash the party. Well, she didn't really crash the party, but she rocked up uninvited, and she brought with her a golden apple. Now, the story goes that on the golden apple, it said the word Callisti. So Callisti means, it's a Greek word, and it translates to for the prettiest or for the fairest one, right? So she had a golden apple with the word Callisti, which means to the prettiest or to the fairest one, and she rolled the golden apple into the party. And what ended up happening is that all the women found this golden apple, which said to the prettiest or to the fairest, and all the women started fighting over this golden apple. I'm the prettiest. No, I'm the prettiest. I'm the prettiest. I'm the prettiest. Can you imagine all these women fighting over this golden apple? And in the end, there was 3 goddesses that were really battling it out. Who was the most fairest of them all? So there was Hera, which was Zeus's wife. Athena, she's known as a goddess of war and intellect, and also Aphrodite, which was the goddess of beauty and love and harmony, also associated with Venus. So it was Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite all fighting over this golden apple. And so what they said, they asked Zeus to decide who was the prettiest, who was the fairest. And Zeus was like, I'm not getting involved in this, you know. And Hera was his wife. So, I mean, he was biased towards her, right? He better pick her. Otherwise, you know, happy wife, happy life. Like, he probably wouldn't have been in a good position after the party. So what did Zeus do? He decided to offload that decision to Paris. So Paris was then given the job to choose out of Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena who was the fairest, who was the prettiest of them all. And so these women, it said, were bribing him, trying to persuade him to choose them. So Hera, the wife of Zeus, offered him riches beyond his wildest fantasies. Athena, who I mentioned was the goddess of the battle, of intellect, she offered him victory and glory in all his battles. And then Aphrodite, the goddess of love and harmony and beauty, she offered him, of course, the most beautiful woman in the world. And in the story, it goes that the most beautiful woman in the world was Helen of Troy. And Helen, as some of you probably know if you've watched the movie or you've heard the story of the Trojan War, Helen was married to the king of Sparta. And so the story goes that, of course, Paris, being a man, chose Aphrodite and said, I want to have the most beautiful woman in the world, which was Helen, who was already married. And so Paris ran off with Helen. And that was kind of what started the Trojan War, which went for many years. And so often we're not actually told that, I mean, if you've heard about the history of the Trojan War, you're not often told that Eris was the one to actually start the whole thing with her golden apple, right? By throwing that golden apple into the party where she was not invited. And I think what's really, really important to note about these stories, I think we can, it's easy to like judge Eris and be like, oh, she's a troublemaker, she caused the war, she's, you know, the goddess of chaos and disorder. But we have to actually understand that it was actually Zeus and the other gods and goddesses that didn't invite her to the party. If they had just invited her to the wedding celebration like everyone else, she wouldn't have acted out of spite. Now, that is not to say that if someone does us wrong that we seek revenge, right? Because that is definitely the shadow frequency of Eris, and we're going to talk about that in more detail shortly. But let's first point out that the way she acted was coming from a wounded place. It was coming from a place of pain, because she was excluded. I think all of us have been excluded at one point in our life or another, and it doesn't feel good, right? Maybe even when we were kids, if there was a bully where you were excluded or you didn't fit in, it doesn't feel good. And often it's like human nature, right? What we would describe as human nature, to then spite that person who maybe excluded us or did us wrong, someone who maybe didn't treat us well. Often, what do? We want to get back at them in some way. And this really gets into how Eris is such a fundamental part of us developing our psyche and evolving into Christ-minded beings. Because Eris, yes, in her shadow form, she's acting out of spite and vengeance, which is never okay, because often, yeah, she was done wrong by, but then by retaliating, it's almost like she's lowering herself to that standard. That's a very big collective wound in humanity right now. We see that playing out on the world stage. Look at all the wars that are happening. It's always justified because of they did wrong to us. Everyone is defending themselves and saying, I have the right to retaliate, to start a war, to judge that person, right? But how many people are looking at themselves and saying, yeah, that person did me wrong, that country, that doctrine, whatever it is, didn't do right by me, but I'm going to take the high road and I'm going to choose to not retaliate to that and lower myself in order to seek revenge. So I think you kind of, if you're sticking with me so far, you're getting this idea of how high Eris might look and how she can be really, really, really transformative to our culture if more of us can adopt her high frequency. So let's have a think about how Eris shows up in our modern day world. The shadow frequency of Eris really shows up when we find joy or we're pleased when another person is maybe suffering or in pain. Now, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this is like, I don't do that. I don't take joy in seeing people suffer. Well, let me just give you a few examples how this might manifest. And I'm not saying this is you, but like, I'm sure you know people, if it's not you, that have acted like this, right? So imagine you were cheated on by your ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend, whoever, and that person cheated on you with this other person, and you're really angry, you know, because they lied to your face, they did wrong by you, you know, you feel cheated and hurt and hard done by. And then you find out, like maybe a few months later, that your ex, maybe they just got cheated on, or they just got dumped, or the person they cheated on you with decided to leave them, or they cheated on that person. And there's a part of you that's like, karma got you, or you feel kind of happy or pleased because you feel in some way that, you know, justice was served. So that's one, I think a lot of people can relate to that. What if your boss is just really, really horrible to you, always treating you badly, bullying you, and then they end up getting fired? Maybe someone reports them for bullying, they get fired, they lose their job, they lose their income, and instead of having compassion for that person, because maybe they have to provide food and shelter for their family, they're the main breadwinner for their family, instead you're like, like secretly you're, you know, like you got what you deserve. That's shadow Eris. A big one, how she can play out, and I think a lot of people will relate to this one, is, you know, bitching behind people's backs, like bullying people, excluding people. A big one is like trolls, particularly online. I think we're seeing a lot of that today. That is shadow Eris. It's like, I think what I'm really trying to say here is, it's like, I'm wounded, I'm deeply wounded, and often these people, particularly the ones that are acting out really, I suppose, maliciously or in a mean-spirited way, acting out, you know, trying to bring other people down. People that do that, I promise you, are always doing it from a hurt place. They're doing it from their own pain. People that hurt, like, have you heard that saying, hurt people hurt people? This is Eris. Eris is hurt people hurt people. She was hurt. She was deeply in pain because she didn't get invited to the party. So what did she do? She went out to hurt others. Revenge. And like I said, a lot of us don't want to admit that that's what we do, right? But we all do it. This is a shadow within the collective consciousness. And like I said, it's playing out on the world stage right now. And for those of us that are here to birth the new earth, to birth this 5D consciousness, to bring in the Christ consciousness, we have to look at this shadow. We have to do the work within ourselves, because as above, so below, when we heal ourselves, that's how we heal the outside world. And it's something, I know it's ugly. It's like, I don't want to look at this aspect of myself, but this is the work. Eris is asking us to get real with ourselves. Where am I projecting my pain out onto another? Because it can even be in the way that we judge others. It could be you judging a politician. I know that's a big thing in America right now with the election so close. You know, it's like people are really heated about which side they want to take. And if you're judging other people based on which political party they're associated with, or a big one is like religion, you know, like those Christian fundamentalists that are like, you know, if you don't believe in this doctrine, then you're going to hell, and judging and hating people that that are gay, that are different religions, different nationalities, in the name of God, that is shadow Eris. Because a part of you, and I know this can be hard to understand because this is happening on a very deep subconscious level, a part of you is in pain or in fear, or essentially what it's alluding to is the belief in separation. That's what it is. It's you're acting out of ego, which, and I've spoken about this many, many times. The ego is the belief in separation, that person over there is not me. I'm a righteous person and that person over there is a bad person. And I feel more righteous by judging that person, or that person did wrong to me, so I get to judge them. Even if we're harboring negative thoughts about another person, that is shadow Eris. If we have not opened our heart to every single human being alive on this planet, or not just every human, every animal, every plant, every being within God's kingdom, if we haven't opened our heart fully to every single being, then there is work to do. Then we have not fully arrived in high Eris, and that is where humanity is evolving to. That's the destination we want to get to. And I'm not saying that, I don't know if we ever fully arrive. I think there's always going to be, we're human, so we're always going to, have these moments where we don't act, in our highest accord. And that's okay. We don't have to be perfect, but I think it's the intention to do this work. I'm going to be responsible for myself, and I'm going to look at the way that I treat people every day, asking myself, how can I do better? How did I do today? How did I handle each interaction today? Where could I have been more loving? I think if we're asking these questions and we're being real with ourselves, like not judging ourselves, not condemning ourselves, but just being aware of how much we love, how much we open our hearts, how much we really live in grace and understanding and compassion and empathy. Like, that's high Eris in my opinion. So now that I've said all of that, maybe let's talk about high Eris, like high frequency Eris. Like, what does she look like? Because often what I find is, like any other planet, any archetype that we look at the shadow frequency and the higher frequency. But when I was doing my research on Eris, there was very little information about her higher frequency. I was finding a lot of stuff about her shadow frequency, which is of course being spiteful and being revengeful and creating war and stirring the pot and creating chaos and acting from our wounds, acting out of our pain, right? That's shadow Eris. But yeah, I found it really interesting that not many people are speaking about her in her highest frequency, and every other archetype has both the light and dark. Like everything in this universe has the light and dark. Like that's the law of polarity, right? So they both have to exist. And in order for us to reach these higher states, we actually need to look at the shadow so we can alchemize it and transmute it and to bring in the higher frequency. So that's what I want to do today. I want to talk about Eris. Like, what is she really about when we embody her in her healthy expression, not just acting out of the wounded expression. Like I said, most people in humanity are acting from wounded Eris. But those of us that are like, if you're still here, then you're ready to do this work and look at how we can embody this high Eris, this higher expression of Eris. So the high side of Eris is that she's really a goddess of empowerment, because she's not afraid to go into the dark, right? She's not afraid to look at her wounding, into the places where most of us want to bypass and numb out and not look at. Eris is like, no, we're going to go there. And when we go there, that's actually how we step into our power. And rather, I mentioned before that Eris is the goddess of, she's the sister of Mars, and Mars is often the god of war. And so Eris kind of has like this war feel to her, like she caused the Trojan War. She has this vengeance about her. But Eris in her highest form It's about using that warrior-like nature to actually stand up for what's right, and to actually use that fire, that passion, to defend maybe those that don't have a voice, to maybe empower other people, to, rally the troops and to inspire others to really stand up for something that serves all beings, not just the self, right? Because Eris in her highest form, I really believe she is the Christ consciousness. It's recognizing that we all are one. And so from that standpoint, even if someone is doing wrong to you, from the Christ consciousness, you have the ability to discern that that person is acting out of ignorance. So it's not to condone their behavior. It's not saying that what they've done is right, but it's saying like, I recognize that you are lost, my brother or sister. I can see that you have forgotten who you are, that you have forgotten that you and I are one. And when you hurt others, you only hurt yourself. And it's saying, rather than me stooping down to your level, I'm going to rise up and I'm going to meet you with love. And I'm going to meet you with compassion. And I'm going to meet you with forgiveness. And that takes a lot of courage and willpower and strength to do that. That is not for the faint of heart, anyone who's doing this work. But guess what? This was exactly what Jesus was teaching. This was truly Jesus's ministry. What did Jesus teach again and again and again? Love your neighbor, love your enemy, love everyone as you would love yourself. Why? Because they are yourself. They are you. In the absolute truth that all is one, that everyone is your reflection. They are you. So when you do wrong to another, guess what? Karma will always bring that back to you. Regardless how badly they've treated you, they cheated on you, they excluded you from the party, they caused a war. If you think that that justifies your wrong behavior, guess what? The universe we live in has this beautiful system called karma, which knows how to work itself out. And if you have ill intention, it doesn't matter how you justify that ill intention. But if your intention is to hurt someone, even if they've hurt you, but if you have an intention, I want them to hurt because they hurt me, or this is justified because of religion or whatever the thing, if your intention is to hurt someone else, guess what? You're creating negative karma for yourself. And that will always have to come back to you in some form. It might not be in this lifetime, but you will create loops of karma for yourself. And you won't get out of that karmic loop until you bring the higher frequency to it, which is forgiveness. Forgiveness is an aspect of our Christ consciousness, because forgiveness removes us from the karmic loop. It says, you know what, I've learned my lesson, and I don't want to keep replaying this same cycle again and again and again. So, to bring it back, what is High Eris? She's a warrior of peace. She's a warrior, a light warrior. She's a warrior of healing, a divine feminine healer, because she's bringing in that Christ consciousness. And she's standing tall in that. That's, to me, is what a light warrior is. It's not necessarily going and fighting on the battlefield. The shadow frequency of Eris is creating the war and going out and fighting other people. But the highest frequency, there can be a high frequency of the warrior, which is the peaceful warrior. It's the warrior that is fighting for love and showing people how to walk the path of love. When people do wrong to me, I open my heart more, because I know that person is hurting inside. I know that person has pain. And rather than me causing them more pain by judging them, how about I offer them compassion and grace? That's how we change the world. That is a peaceful warrior. That is a light warrior. That's my definition anyway. This is High Eris. High Eris is healthy competition. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of competition. Unhealthy competition is definitely shadow Eris, being jealous that that woman over there is having more success than you, or she's prettier than you, right? that's shadow Eris. Because what happens when we're like jealous of someone else, maybe, and this really ties into the sister wound, right? Like what patriarchy has done to the sisterhood is pinning women against other women. And so how often we women, we're taught from as young girls, you know, we have to be the prettiest one, like that story goes, like who's the fairest, or we get told that we have to be the best at sport or the best academically, and then as we get older we want to be like number one in the workplace or in our business, and we compare ourselves to this woman or to that woman. And really feminine energy, you know, the divine feminine is really about collaboration, and that's something I learn a lot from the bees and the hive mind, is like they work as one collective, and that is very much true of our feminine energy. Like when women come together, that's when we're the most strong. And the patriarchy completely has conditioned women to see other women as a threat. And so shadow Eris can show up as the sister wound and women competing against other women. Even for men, the attention of men. How many women, like you just watch those reality TV shows, it's always women pinned against women. That is shadow Eris. So guess what high Eris is? It's actually celebrating other people. Maybe imagine, you know, you're in a race and you come second, and you know your sister comes first in whatever race that is, and I'm sure there's a part of a lot of us that is like jealous or angry or spiteful of that person getting number one and we're number two. It doesn't feel good, right? Because we're always told like, you know, you have to win if you want to be worthy and successful, and all of this patriarchal crap that we're told. And high Eris would be like recognizing that you and I are one, that your success is actually my success. That it's not just, you know, again, when we're in the shadow Eris, we're believing this separation consciousness. So we're like, if that person is having a really successful business, then my business, you know, can't be successful. It's like we're in scarcity. We're afraid that that person shining their light is taking away from mine. If that person has a boyfriend, then that means there's less men for me. And now secretly I despise that person because they have the thing that I want. And, you know, all of nature is not competing with each other. You know, like there's a harmony that happens. Like the trees aren't comparing each other to the tree next to it. It's just they're all working in harmony. Like the animals know like how to take what they need and leave the rest, and somehow everyone gets fed, right? And we humans have, because of our culture and the way we've been programmed, we believe that there's not enough to go around. And so high Eris for us would look like celebrating other people's success, cheering our competitors, quote unquote, you know, because again, they are an aspect of us. If we all come from the one source, then they are us, and their win is my win. And so do you see how this is like Eris is really inviting us to step into this higher spiritual nature, to actually bring in our divinity. Because if you are not on a spiritual path, I don't know if you would be able to really alchemize the shadow Eris, because she's very, I want to say shadow Eris reflects very much like the instinctual human animal nature. And I think that's why she was only discovered in 2005, because I don't believe humanity was ready to really understand her until then. And I think we still have a long way to go, but I mean, like, at least we're having this conversation now, right? So that says something. So the final thing I really want to speak about is in a way comparing Eris to Jesus, because I mentioned, like, I really believe Eris is inviting us to step into Christ consciousness. That's how I see her. The more I study her, I'm like, this is really about bringing our divinity into the human and doing as Jesus said, which was to love everyone as you would love yourself. I have a quote here from the Gospel of Matthew, which says, "Ye have heard that it hath been said, Thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies." Bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. I love that quote from Jesus because I really believe that is exactly what High Eris is asking us to do. To really love our enemies, the people that persecute you, the people that hate you. Can you open your heart to those people? And like I said, that is taking tremendous strength. That is a true light warrior, because not many people are ready to do that work. Most people are in the blame and shame projected outwards onto other people. But those of us on this path have to recognize that those people that are doing it are the ones that are suffering the most. Revenge, judgment, all of these lower frequency emotions, I want to say, or shadow frequencies, they're never coming from our Christ nature. They're always coming from our ego, because our ego feels threatened, our ego feels that we're not special, whatever the thing. It's always coming from the pain body. It's coming from this wounded aspect of self, like a wounded inner child projecting outwards. And so we really, for those of us on this path, we want to take responsibility for that. We want to look at that. We want to actually not condemn ourselves, not judge ourselves, but actually, can we bring compassion to those parts of ourselves, those parts of us that do get jealous when someone else gets the thing that we want, or beats us, or is better than us in some way, right? The parts of us that maybe, when our partner cheats on us or does something bad to us, that maybe I want to then say something spiteful to hurt you because you wounded me. All of those little ways that we don't act in our highest nature, can we become more conscious of them? And once we're conscious of them, try to choose differently in the future. And if we don't choose differently, that's okay. But constantly just reflecting, like I mentioned earlier, how did I do today? What could I improve on? And if we're acting, again, if we're acting from this wounded place, having compassion for ourselves, because when we do that, that's actually how we're able to extend compassion to other people. We can only love others as much as we've loved ourselves. And love doesn't mean all the romantic Hollywood fairy tale fluffy stuff that we see. True love is unconditional love. And so true unconditional love requires us to go into the darkest parts of ourselves and bring compassion, bring empathy, bring forgiveness. And through that, that's how we transcend our lower natures, and then we're able to extend that onto other people, right? And we can meet them when they're acting, not in their highest accord. Otherwise, it's just two egos battling it out. And it's who wins at the end of the day? We both just create more karma for ourselves. We both just end up feeling crap. It's are we actually getting anywhere? And so I love this quote by Josh Billings, which says, "There is no revenge that is so complete as forgiveness." And I want to talk about forgiveness because I really believe Christ consciousness and High Eris, this high expression of Eris, it's really asking us to bring in this divine quality of forgiveness. And I think a lot of people don't understand forgiveness. It's such a misunderstood word, because people think when I say I forgive you that I'm condoning the behavior, that I'm saying, oh, this is fine, treat me poorly, or do this bad thing. That is not what forgiveness means. It doesn't mean that you're making someone else right for bad behavior. Forgiveness is truly about seeing a situation from a higher perspective. This is how A Course in Miracles teaches it. It's about seeing something from the Christ level and to be able to recognize oneness in all. And when I recognize that you are a Christ, I am a Christ, this being over there is a Christ, this politician is a Christ, that we are all divine children of God, from that absolute truth, if you are acting out of alignment with your highest expression, if you're acting rude to me, if you're acting abusive to me, if you're lying, if you're cheating, whatever the thing that we judge and say is bad, rather than projecting onto them they're a bad person. It's raising your awareness to that Christ consciousness, right? A lot of people talking about Christ consciousness but not actually embodying it, because this is the truth of it. It's about elevating your awareness to the Christ consciousness and recognizing that person, even if they're acting, especially if they're not acting in their highest accord, to see them as the Christ and to recognize that they are acting out of ignorance. And in that awareness, to then bring forgiveness and say, I forgive you for forgetting who you are. I'm not saying what you're doing is right. I'm not condoning this behavior, but I understand that this is not actually who you truly are. That is what forgiveness means. And by doing so, guess what? You are doing so much work spiritually, more than sitting on a meditation cushion. This is exactly what Jesus teaches in A Course in Miracles. The spiritual work is out in your everyday life, and it's particularly through the people that you struggle to love the most, the people that challenge you the most, the people that trigger you the most, the people that you're like, how can I possibly open my heart to this person? They've done so much wrong to me. The way they speak to me is not right. If you can recognize them as the Christ, well, guess what, my darlings? You will be moving so forward in your spiritual evolution. This is high stuff. This is really, really advanced, like spiritually advanced stuff. And this is exactly what Jesus was teaching. Why did he say when he was crucified on the cross, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do? He forgave the people that were crucifying him. And this is high Eris. She's saying, rather than go and crucify your brothers and sisters, can you elevate your consciousness and see them as the divine beings in which they are? So I just want to say, that's not for the faint of heart, right? And that's why I say she's very, very needed right now, particularly as we anchor in this Christ consciousness. But again, like, humanity has a lot of work to do. But guess what? If you're still listening to this episode, then I believe you're here for a reason. And you and me, we are going to start being the ones to lead the way and show people how to walk this path, this path of the heart, the path of love. This is the way. This is what Jesus was talking about, and it's not for everyone. But for those of you that really want to see change in the world, this is how we do it. It's not about going and changing the world out there. It's like looking at ourselves. Where am I keeping out love? Where am I denying love? Because love, and this is what the Course in Miracles teaches, that love is all there is. Love is the only truth. So if there's not love, then you best believe then it's not truth. And this is why Eris is so revolutionary. And I want to read you this quote from Stephanie Dowick from her book Forgiveness and Other Acts of Love. And she says, forgiveness is in no way justifies the actions that caused your wounding, nor does it mean that you have to seek out those that harmed you. It is simply a movement to release and ease your heart of pain and hatred that binds it. You know, and I love that, because that's exactly why we forgive. Because yes, you're going to spiritually advance, but guess what? This is how we access the kingdom or the peace of God. This is everything Jesus was speaking about. It was truly to reach this state of eternal happiness and bliss. And we do that by forgiving people. Because when we hold vengeance in our hearts, when we judge other people, we are always hurting ourselves. We are bringing our frequency down. It's impossible to judge someone else and not harbor that judgment within your own body. When you judge others, that person's not feeling anything. They don't know that you're judging them unless you're like actually verbalizing it. But guess what? That vibration of judgment, it's a very low frequency. It actually sticks in your body. And if over time you're just constantly judging and feeling angry and feeling resentment towards other people, that's going to get really, really heavy after some time. It's going to feel like you're wearing rocks on your back, like you've got a backpack on filled with rocks. all the judgment and all the vengeance that you're carrying. And humanity's got a lot of those rocks in its backpack right now. And every time you forgive someone, you are just taking one of those rocks outside of your backpack, and you are getting lighter and lighter and lighter. And that lightness, that purity, is just rippling out, and it's doing so much more than you can even comprehend within your limited mind. Because love truly is multidimensional. It's healing. It is everything that this universe is made of. And so the power of it is just so underrated and underestimated. And so forgiveness is not a weakness. It's not like, oh, I'm just letting them get away with it. Actually, this is what it means to be a light warrior, a peace warrior, a light worker, if you want to call it. This is what it means. You're elevating the frequency of humanity. And that's the most bravest, most badass, revolutionary, change-making thing you can possibly do right now. So don't underestimate the power of opening your heart and loving, particularly those that do you wrong or that are doing wrong in your perception. And so I finally just want to mention about something about why, and this is my own personal reflection, why I believe that, Eris was kind of looked over. So when they discovered her in 2005, all of a sudden Pluto got demoted, and then instead of kind of looking at Eris as this new dwarf planet that we just discovered, the limelight kind of got taken away from her, and we just looked at, oh, Pluto's getting demoted, and people were grieving Pluto getting demoted as a dwarf planet. And I believe if we look at it, again, this is more from like an esoteric level, but I believe that the reason why she kind of got bypassed a little bit, and the reason why we only focus on her, like most people that like study her only talk about her lower nature and how she's like a goddess of discord and chaos. And I really believe that is because that dark feminine archetype has been so heavily suppressed in our subconscious and also within society. And so I think it's really, for those of you on a divine feminine reclamation path, to look at Eris, because I think there's so much in this, like what I've spoken about today, bringing in the Christ consciousness. Like, she is a fearless goddess that we should be embracing and not shutting out and saying, I'm not like her, I don't want to associate her, she's not as fluffy as Aphrodite, or she's not like this innocent Virgin Mary. Not that there's anything wrong with these other goddesses, but I think Eris, she's got so much substance, and there's so much misunderstanding about her, and there's also so much power in her. I really believe she is like this transformational, revolutionary figure that we get to work with now. And we can actually look at it in our chart and see where she's showing up in our chart, because as I mentioned, she'll be in Aries, the sign of Aries, in every single person's chart, because she takes so long to orbit the sun. But she's going to show up in a different house for everyone listening to this. And I think the beautiful thing that Eris really represents is she represents the power to see and understand not just herself, like her own shadows, but all of humanity's shadows. Not only just to see it, but then to bring forgiveness, to bring these like Christ traits to it, like forgiveness and empathy and compassion. So it's not just bringing that to our own shadows, but doing it for the wider collective, for doing it for humanity. And I think a lot of people are, particularly the patriarchal conditioning we've received, we are so afraid to look at our shadows. We are so conditioned to just, push that stuff down. We don't want to look at it. No, I don't want to be the bad guy. No, project onto everyone else. Eris is asking us to look at the shadow. She's like, you don't get to, like, if you really want to embody this high Eris, if you really want to bring in this 5D consciousness that so many of us on this path say, yeah, we're anchoring in this new earth. This is what it's about. It's about going into the places we don't want to look at. It's about acknowledging that we have both light and dark, and in order to raise our consciousness and to really access more higher states, we need to go into the shadows, and we need to be brave and to look at it and take responsibility and not project outwards. And this is truly the power of the feminine, because, you know, the feminine, she is the descent. And through the descent, that's how we rise. And so she is what I believe as this embodiment of goddess rising. She's the dark, but she also holds so much light if we can alchemize that shadow within all of us and the world at large. So I mentioned before about how Eris will play out individually in our charts. And so for me, I'll just give you an example, because you might want to go after this episode and see where she is specifically in what house system. So the houses will represent what area of your life that she's really playing out. So it could be in your career, in your home life. For me, I have Eris in my 5th house. So the 5th house, for anyone who's not into astrology, is ruled by Leo. So I have a bit of Leo in my chart. And so the shadow aspect of Leo is really about seeking external validation. Leo tends to be a very creative sign. It's all about self-expression, so wanting to be seen, shine my light on the world. So the shadow Eris, the way that she can show up in my chart specifically, and I mean obviously it's more complicated depending on what aspect she's making and so which planet she's speaking to, but just to give you like a general idea, for me it can kind of show up as me feeling threatened by other people shining their light, or other people's creative projects taking away my light. Of course they never can, but remember how we spoke about the high Eris is celebrating other people's wins and celebrating their successes, and not feeling threatened that they're taken away from me, and me not secretly hoping that, you know, whatever they're shining in the world, themselves or their creations, you know, the shadow Eris would be like, oh, I hope that they fail, or my projects or what I produce is better than theirs because I feel threatened by that. Whereas the high Eris would recognize that they are me, that we are all Christ, that we all are one. And so even if they're outshining me, quote unquote, which I don't really believe, because I believe we all have a unique light and we're all here to shine our light in our own unique way. But just say I feel or I perceive that they are shining their light brighter than me, then rather than me feeling vengeance or spiteful, I genuinely celebrate them, and actually I feel inspired by them shining their light. And that's a hard thing to do, right? It's not like just pretending like, oh yeah, someone maybe, like I said, beats you in the race and you're just like, yeah, I'm so happy for you, but then like you're saying it through gritted teeth. That's not high Eris. Like, it has to genuinely come from your heart. Like, be sincere. Like, I really am happy that you're winning. I'm so happy for you. And that takes a lot of shadow work. So that's just a really tiny example of how that plays out. Now, before I go, I want to announce I have created a new program called Goddess Rising, and it's a 3-month one-on-one astrology and feminine embodiment coaching journey into the underworld to reclaim your divine feminine power. So essentially I've created a one-on-one coaching program, and it's kind of, well, it's a mixture. It's a coaching program because I do feminine embodiment coaching, but it's also a deep dive into your personal birth chart and looking at, first of all, we'll do a general reading. So I'll give you a whole reading of your birth chart, but then each week over the next over the 3-month period, we'll be looking at Eris in your birth chart, but we'll be looking at Lilith, which is the dark feminine. We'll be looking at Ceres, who's also the queen archetype. She's the empress, and how you can step into that archetype. I said Lilith, Eris, and we'll also be looking at the Venus cycle, which is basically, it goes beyond where Venus is in your birth chart. It's really looking at your feminine initiation. So all of us through the Venus cycle will be born at a specific point in the cycle. So some of you may know that sometimes Venus is a morning star, sometimes it's a evening star, and it represents this cycle of life, death, rebirth. And it's usually associated with the story of Inanna, if you've heard of that. And so where we're born in terms of the Venus cycle and which meta goddess we were born under, that can say a lot about our specific feminine journey, like how we are actually here to anchor in the divine feminine, because we know that the divine feminine is so multifaceted. The goddess is so multifaceted. So if you're curious to kind of learn about your personal expression, your unique blueprint of the divine feminine, how the dark goddess looks for you, how the queen looks for you, how your initiation into the feminine journey looks for you, if you want to look at how Eris plays out in your birth chart, what we've spoken about today. And then not just to understand it from an intellectual level, but I've created this program to really help you embody it, like to bring it into the body. And through embodiment work, we're able to clear any stagnant energy, any blocks where you're not stepping into your full expression of those divine feminine archetypes. So where are you not stepping into your full radiance and magnetism as a divine feminine being, right? Because often there's limiting beliefs, there's stagnant energy, particularly around our sexual centers, that can get stuck, and they actually block us from being in alignment with what it is that we're trying to magnetize in our life. And they block us from stepping into our most authentic version of self, or who we are from like this most high level. And I think astrology is so beautiful to study, because you can really start to understand yourself at this deeper level, and it gives you these, I think, understanding how these goddesses show up in your birth chart really get you reflecting and analyzing on that particular archetype in that particular area of your life. And just having that awareness can really bring so many aha moments. You know, often things stay in the dark because we're not aware of them. And once they're out of the dark, once we shine a light on it, that's how it gets liberated, and that's how it gets transformed, and that's how we step into our power. And so if this is speaking to you, my program, I don't know if I mentioned it, but it's called Goddess Rising. It's a one-on-one program with me. So it's a 3-month journey. I only have one space open at the moment, and I'm also offering a discount. So take a look at that. I'm going to leave a link to that in the description below if you'd like to work with me and go on this divine feminine journey. I'll also be including some divine feminine mystery teachings as well, to kind of go deeper into the mythology of the different goddesses that we're working with, and you know, particularly the feminine mysteries that are associated with the Venus cycle, if that's kind of what you're into, as well as like, you know, journaling prompts and meditations to help you like really deepen and embody this wisdom. So if that calls to you, I will leave a link in the description. It's called Goddess Rising, and yeah, I would love to work with you if this is singing to your heart. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope that it helped you to reflect on Eris and this archetype, and why I really believe it's so important to have this conversation and bring her forward. And the final quote I want to leave you with is a quote from A Course in Miracles. As you probably know, I love A Course in Miracles, and I think it's just really profound, that text. And this quote says that the holiest of all spots on earth is where an ancient hatred has become a present love. And I just love that so much, because I really believe that's the essence of what I've spoken about today, where an ancient hatred has become a present love. And that's the holiest spot. So where, you know, you're bringing love and opening your heart to maybe someone who's done you wrong, that's the holiest of all spots on earth. So something to take away, something to think about. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Take care. Mwah.